reporter, the pressure to produce might have an adverse effect on him. Fortunately, everything seems to be working out all right. Somehow, Dennis keeps coming up with a different person every Tuesday at 10.
There you go.
But frankly, we can't figure out how he does it.
Dennis Doda! Dennis, my grandmother.
Doda's people, they're everywhere.
And she has very...
This is your TV station, Fine TV.
The shakeup in the Reagan White House. Donald Regan is out, and the man who replaces him came to national attention during another White House scandal with these words.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
Good evening, I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline. What cost Donald Regan his job?
I think there's no question he's been an absolute disaster, and probably has damaged this presidency more severely than anyone ever assumed he could.
And what makes Howard Baker such a popular replacement? That's our focus tonight.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
For some weeks now, they have been talking and writing about Donald Regan in the past tense. In some cases, it may have been deliberate, in others unconscious, but either way, it conveyed the sense of this unsentimental community of Washington, D.C., that Regan was gone, finished. His one-line letter of resignation today was an anticlimax. Everyone in this town knew he was finished when the story made the rounds, but Regan and the First Lady weren't talking, that in fact, he had hung up on her and she on him. That was the death knell. Somehow, Regan had gone in relatively short order from being arguably the second most powerful man in the country to having almost no public defenders. Even here in the nation's capital, where power can evaporate with astonishing speed, Don Regan's fall from grace was remarkable. 2 years ago, almost to the day, he made a little speech to his new staff.
Allow me to introduce myself. In case you're guessing who I am, I'm not Reagan, I'm Reagan.
He has always felt that he should be the number one person there and sort of described himself as a deputy president. We don't have deputy presidents under our Constitution. And I don't think he has neither the temperament or the style to be a staff person, to be subordinate himself to someone else.
You can say that no position has such a great imbalance between the power or authority of the individual and the legitimacy. Here's someone with a lot of influence, a lot of weight to throw around, but with very little legitimacy. He's not elected. He has no constituency. He has no statutory authority. His authority derives solely from serving the president and speaking for the president.
Our captain's agenda, that is the president's agenda, will determine our game plan. Remember that it's his game plan, not ours, not yours, not mine, but his game plan.
Don Regan is not a humble man serving someone else. I mean, Don Regan is a man who loved all the perks of the office. He enjoyed, I think his attitude was, if Ronald Reagan doesn't want to work hard and be president, I'm going to be president.
Where's he going? Where's he going?
I don't know where I'm supposed to come. Yes, France. It's all right. France.
They both came from a background of success. They both had dealt at a high level. Reagan is a manager of a company. Reagan is a governor of a state, and so they had a common background, and they shared a lot in common. I think the president liked the way Don presented things to him for decision.
Ronald Reagan's style of decision-making appears to be one in which he likes to hear other people talk, and then he responds to it. And so he's particularly susceptible to a strong chief system, to the problems inherent in a strong chief system, where one person's speaking and the other people are mute.
Don Regan asked people's advice, and he had his own opinions, and he in turn brought that opinion or option to the president. Ronald Reagan works much better when he has a series of options, listens to the input from a variety of people, and uses his own judgment.
The name of the game from here on out is going to be teamwork. And on this team, while everybody can state their case, and do that to the best of their ability. Once the decision is made, we've all got to get in line with that program.
What's occurred now is the president no longer has advisors. The president has Don Regan, and Don Regan has advisors.
We're all going to miss him.
But weren't there problems with Mr. Reagan? Weren't there problems with Mr. Reagan, sir?
That's nonsense.
He basically chased me out of the White House first. I was the holdover. Chased Bud McFarlane out. Chased Max Friedersdorf out. Chased Jack Svahn out, who were people who had their own independent constituency and their own relationship with the president.
Don Regan insisted on a degree of hierarchy and span of control that was just unfortunate. He wanted everyone reporting to the president through him. And as a result, he shielded the president from getting a lot of good advice.
I'm announcing the following reassignment of responsibilities among two of my most senior advisors. I intend to nominate James A. Baker III to become Secretary of the Treasury, and I intend to appoint Donald T. Regan as Chief of Staff and Assistant to the President, effective upon the date of Jim Baker's confirmation by the Senate.
Even under Jim Baker, you could go to Jim Baker, Mike Deaver controlled the schedule at that time, and you'd say, I need to see the president, and you'd get 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever particular time you needed. But with Don Regan, he controlled the schedule. And if you went in and said, I want to see the president to talk about this, he said, I'll tell him about it.
He scheduled meetings, and he could either schedule a meeting or not schedule a meeting. Those kind of things are the prerogative of the Chief of Staff, and he controls the President's time. Certainly he could open himself to some criticism for that, but I don't think it's that justified.
He loves the limelight, and he just absolutely enjoys having the power. And he's had more power than any man in the history of this country that hasn't been elected to the presidency.
That photo, which showed up on the front page, at least of the Times, maybe the Post, with Gorbachev, Reagan, and Don Regan. You have two heads of state and the Chief of Staff, and it was conspicuous to a lot of Washingtonians that Don Regan was getting into it, and where a servant of the president should be in the background.
If we act as a team, having been selected to play on the Reagan team, we can really write history.
The great tragedy of Don Regan's legacy is that historians won't give Ronald Reagan the credit he deserves for having restored effectiveness and dignity to the office of the presidency. The debate will be the first-term staff led by Jim Baker versus the second-term staff led by Donald Regan. So I think for a man that's had great success in his life, he's going to go down as one of the all-time great failures in politics.
But now Donald Reagan's stewardship at the White House has ended, and Howard Baker's is about to begin. When we come back, we'll focus on how much that changeover will affect the presidency as we talk live with Ed Rollins and with another one-time top official at the Reagan White House team, former Communications Director David Gergen.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Ford Motor Company.
If you bought a new car from Ford Motor Company in 1981, good. Because surveys show on average our 81s have had fewer reported problems all through the years than the 81s you could have bought from any other U.S. car maker. That's also true of our 82s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 86s. With quality like that, whose 87s would you rather be driving in 1993? And at Ford, quality is job one.
Shearson Lehman Brothers, where we stand on IRAs. We believe you should continue contributing to your IRA because the gains are still tax deferred. But we also recommend you supplement your IRA with an SRA, our supplemental retirement account, a disciplined way to double, triple, quadruple your retirement nest egg. Talk with us. Shearson Lehman Brothers. Minds over money.
Hey, your old saw seen better days. Well then, save now during Spring Project Days at Payless Cashways. Find great buys on tools, like a 2-horsepower Black & Decker circular saw, now just $39.99. And there's lots more, like a Vermont American 13-piece drill bit set. High-speed steel makes them last just $7.99. So come on, get all you need and save during Spring Project Days now at Payless Cashways. Don't do yourself without us.
Payless Cashways.
phone in your questions on farm debt or overproduction on the next ISU Extension Reports on Tuesday, March 3rd at 6:30 p.m. You may dial 1-800-262-3804 or 1-800-262-2224. And if you live in Ames, call 294-1870. Join host Roger Brown and noted economist Professor Neil Harrell on Tuesday, March 3rd at 6:30 p.m. on ISU Extension Reports.
Sunday on Business.
Joining us live in our Washington Bureau, Edward Rollins, former assistant to President Reagan for political and intergovernmental affairs, currently with a political lobbying firm here in Washington. And David Gergen, former White House communications director, now editor of U.S. News and World Report. David, give us, if you can, an anecdotal example of how Don Regan ran that White House staff.
Well, I think the best anecdotes probably do come out of Geneva and then Reykjavik with the two summit conferences, whereas as our viewer saw earlier, he inserted himself so heavily between Mr. Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev on a subject he knows precious little about in Geneva, and then in Reykjavik, of course, he was the man who stormed out right after the summit was over and cursed the Soviets in effect. Very hard line, caused a lot of problems for the White House. Very headstrong, bullheaded, moved ahead without a lot of thought sometimes. That's what got him in trouble so often.
Now, Ed Rollins, one has to conclude that President Reagan had the man that he wanted, and if he had not enjoyed that style of Don Regan's, if he hadn't felt it was a useful one, he would have terminated it a long time ago. I mean, he's been resisting getting rid of Don Regan.
The president has always had great difficulty removing anybody from his staff, and I think that he enjoyed the company of Don Regan. Don Regan played a different role in the president's company one-on-one than he did with subordinates or cabinet members. He could be very charming and tell a lot of jokes, and I think he and the president were comfortable together. But I think what you have to really analyze is, was he a good chief of staff? Did he perform the management task that Ronald Reagan needed done? And clearly the answer is no.
Well, all right. That is, in fact, exactly what we want to analyze, because we're also going to get into how he differs from the man who is now going to succeed him, Hal Baker. But let's keep talking for another couple of minutes about Don Regan.
Ted, if I may say, I think that there's beyond that. As far as I could tell, Don Regan had the closest relationship of anyone who has had with Ronald Reagan in office of the presidency. He was the first person who came into the presidency and to the White House who was of the president's generation. When he came that first day, Mike Deaver opened the door to the Oval Office and said, "Mr. President, I finally brought you a playmate your own age." And that relationship was very warm. It was very genuine. They were both these Irishmen who loved to swap stories. And I think the departure is going to make Reagan more effective but lonelier.
I think the other side of that, though, is that they were both of a different generation. Both men who didn't see a lot of the changes that have taken place in this country, particularly in the women's movement, particularly among young Americans. And I think that sometimes Don Regan reinforced some of the president's worst instincts, where Jim Baker would bring new facts to the table, or Mike Deaver, and say, "Mr. President, you ought to look at these things," and oftentimes it changed the president's mind.
You brushed past something there a moment ago. Reagan is something of a male chauvinist, isn't he?
There's no question about it.
It was ironic, in fact, that what upended him in the final analysis was his lack of sensitivity to women. I think had something to do with the way he treated Nancy Reagan, and that was when he crossed his final threshold. There's no doubt, as you said earlier, that when he hung up on her, that was it.
That doesn't just show a lack of sensitivity. I mean, that shows a certain stupidity. Anyone who knows how protective President Reagan is of Mrs. Reagan and how protective she is of him must know that that's not the way to deal with her. I mean, do you have any understanding of how that came to pass?
I think it came to pass early on. I remember being on Air Force one time when the First Lady called Don Regan, and he basically brushed her off to an aide. And I said, "That's one of the burdens of high office." And he said, "Well, I'm not letting any woman push me around. I made it clear to her when I came in here, and she's not going to push me around." Mrs. Reagan didn't want to push anybody around. She had the best interest of her husband. She had good political instincts, and anything that she was telling Don Regan was in her husband's best interest.
Well, now, David, I can understand that almost happening a couple of years ago, but anyone who has been around the White House for a while should have caught on pretty fast, and Don Regan was certainly not an ignorant man. He's a very smart fellow.
He's a very smart fellow, but arrogant. But I must say, I think in the last few weeks, this crisis came to a head very rapidly because She, I think naturally enough, wanted to protect her husband in his recuperation period and wanted to keep him out of the public limelight, resting a long recuperation. He, sensing that the presidency was in deep trouble, wanted to get the president out on the campaign trail, in effect, reviving his office and his powers. And they clashed frequently over that, and I think that in the end he was quite desperate to get the president out to salvage something, and that brought a direct confrontation between them.
Let me ask you both, because you're both experts on this subject. Had it been you, and had someone asked you at a time like this, should the president have been out on the campaign trail right now? Should he be campaigning this very moment to kind of salvage his presidency? Ed?
Going out on the campaign trail is not the answer. The answer would have been for the president to have had all the facts 3 months ago, to have come forward in his first press conference or his first national speech and say to the American public, some mistakes were made. Leadership is a very lonely place. The decisions I made I thought were in the best interest of the American public and the hostages. This thing would have been behind us. The American public is more concerned about the mishandling of this incident than they are basically about the original decision.
All right, David, a quick answer from you on this.
Absolutely. I think where Don Regan failed in the aftermath was in not getting the facts together, not making an emergency effort to get it out. Pat Moynihan had it right a long time ago. The president had 48 hours to get the facts out. He failed to do that. Don Regan has to take responsibility for that.
All right, gentlemen, when we come back, we're going to talk about the man who now takes that very difficult post of Chief of Staff, former Senator Howard Baker. We'll continue in a moment.
When Rusty Donahue went off to teach school in Homer, Alaska, she traded in her 10-year-old Honda Civic for a brand new Civic wagon. She expects to keep her wagon just as long, she says, since she really only uses it for running little errands.
As an energy source for America, foreign oil can be barrels of trouble. The price and the supply go up and down and up. To help us escape the foreign oil roller coaster ride, America is using energy more efficiently, and we're using more energy from other sources, like electricity from coal and nuclear energy. Coal and nuclear energy. So we won't be taken for another ride.
There's nothing like summer in Minnesota. Maybe it's because of the summers I remember here growing up. Maybe it's because this newspaper brings it all back. It's the new summer issue of the Minnesota Explorer, and it's free when you call this special toll-free number. Page after page, there are things to do and places to see this summer. There's a story about the headwaters of the Mississippi, where the river begins. Learn how Minnesota's walleye fishermen are doubling up with some of the best bass fishing in the country. Find out about downtown walking tours that highlight the best of the cities. And read all about the hot summer action at Brainerd International Raceway. There's so much to do. There's even a 12-page calendar with over 600 summer events. And it's free. Call 1-800-228-3800 to receive your new summer issue. And start planning the summer vacation you'll remember the rest of your life. The Minnesota Explorer newspaper. Call 1-800-228-3800.
Saturday on The Health Show.
Continuing our discussion now with Ed Rollins and David Gergen. Yesterday, figuratively speaking, the waters of the Potomac were roiling and angry, and the waves were all over Washington, D.C., and today it's as though someone had poured a barrel of oil, or many barrels of oil, on the Potomac, and it's all in the person of one man, Howard Baker. What is it about Howard Baker, David, that makes him such an instantly acceptable alternative to Don Regan in the office of Chief of Staff?
Well, he's had 15 years of experience here in this city. His fingers tingle with politics. He knows the rhythms and the byways of Washington extremely well. He's a man who has an enormously wide circle of friends, and I think that probably a few Republican candidates today are quite happy that he's not going to be in the race for 1988, too.
Well, certainly one of them is. I mean, Bob Dole was grinning from ear to ear, and he's one of Howard Baker's best friends.
So is Ed Rollins, if you'll note.
All right, Ed Rollins, talk to us for a moment about that all-important relationship, and give me a comparison between the way that Don Regan handled Congress and the way that the former Senate Majority Leader, Howard Baker, is going to handle Congress from his new post in the White House.
Howard Baker's a superb choice for the simple reason he is a consensus builder. He's a man who brings people together, gets a consensus from the group, and moves forward and is very, very effective. The most important thing that Ronald Reagan can accomplish in the next 2 years, his agenda is to preserve what he accomplished in the first 6 years. There's no question the Democratic leadership in the House and the Senate is going to try and take a lot away. The defense build-up, the Contra, what have you. Having someone of the caliber of Howard Baker who can bring a better staff together in the White House, carry the president's agenda to the Hill effectively, I think is just going to be invaluable.
I must say, Ted, on that score, I do differ from Ed. And it seems to me that if Howard Baker's appointment means a continuation of the status quo or preservation of what's been gained so far, that would be helpful, but not enough. The critical question for this president is whether he's going to go forward or not. There's some serious problems this country faces, and I think for Reagan now to enter the history books with a strong record as president, he must make progress in the next 2 years, I think, in slowing the arms race and slowing the runaway budget deficits and trade deficits.
All right, take us both to a place that you have both been, and that is inside the Oval Office, inside the White House. It must be a very, very confused place right now. I mean, there has been so much agony, toing and froing, tugging and pulling over the past few months. How do you begin putting it all back in order again? I mean, what now faces Howard Baker, Ed?
Well, first of all, you've got terrible morale in the White House, and what you ended up with were some very pragmatic people who were loyal to Ronald Reagan, and some people that were in high positions who were loyal to Don Regan. Hopefully they'll all go with Don Regan, and Howard Baker will be able to bring together a staff whose sole loyalty is to Ronald Reagan. I think you need some innovative people. I agree with David to a certain extent that you do have to come up with some initiatives, and there really haven't been any on the table. And I think that a new team, a new momentum, a new energy, a new calming influence, which Howard Baker will have, will just do wonders for the morale of the White House.
David, there is a bird flying over the White House right now. It's called a lame duck. It makes it very difficult to hire the best possible staff, because the best possible people don't necessarily want to go to the White House right now, do they?
Well, there are a coterie of people in this town who are not only loyal to Reagan, but also very close to Howard Baker, and the expectation is that he'll bring several of them with him, and I think that will happen very quickly. It's my understanding that Howard Baker plans to arrive at the White House this Monday morning, and if so, it seems to me beyond organizing a staff, his most important and immediate duty is going to be to work with the president on this radio or televised address of next Wednesday night, and to see if he can get the president to accept personal responsibility for what's happened and to get on top of this case, because as you know, we have many, many long months still ahead of us of tortuous investigations, and there are going to be a lot of more secrets revealed. Some people may wind up going to jail. Howard Baker has to very much get on top of that part of the agenda as well.
Let me just tap both your expertise with a quick question before we run out of time here. What other heads are going to fall, do you think, Ed?
Well, I think the people that are immediately around Wallison, Tom Dawson, Al Kingen, probably several who've already talked about leaving, but the immediate Treasury group that came over with Don Regan probably will leave with him.
Is the cabinet going to stay intact, David?
I think the interesting question right now to watch is Secretary of State. I don't know what his plans are, but my sense of it, he's still not back in the good graces of Mrs. Reagan and a number of other folks in the Reagan entourage. I would not discount the possibility that sometime over the next 2 years, Howard Baker could move on to a job he has always wanted. The only other job in town that he would like now, besides being president and now chief of staff, is the Secretary of State's job. That job may still have some interesting question marks over it.
Gee, that's an interesting point on which to end. Thank you both very much. It was a delight, as always, to have you with us. Thank you. When we come back, how Howard Baker came to be the president's choice and why he agreed to take on the job. We'll get some background information from ABC News political director Hal Bruno.
The tax laws are changing.
The deductions on interest are changing. So maybe you should apply for a card that doesn't charge interest. The American Express card. Apply over the phone by calling 1-800-THE-CARD.
I can't get air.
Before and Afrin.
It worked.
For relief without drowsiness or jitters, Afrin's the spray doctors and pharmacists recommend most.
Stuffed.
Before and Afrin.
Excuse me.
Sorry, looks just like mine.
Well, here's my Cougar XR7.
Great cars, aren't they?
I love mine. Don't tell me. Your Cougar?
I always wanted one. Peppy, aren't they?
Sure, V8 engine.
Yeah, of course.
And I love the way it handles.
Yeah, love it.
Well, nice talking to you.
Excuse me? Oh, sorry. Great car. Gotta get one.
New Mercury Cougar, only at your Lincoln Mercury Mercour dealer.
Gotta get one.
Do you wait for a special occasion to indulge yourself? Pity. I suggest you try Campbell's latest gold label soups, the new Golden Classics. They're worth indulging in every day. Chicken vegetable with long grain and wild rice, sirloin beef with potatoes and mushrooms, cheese pasta tortellini, each with nothing artificial. Now, if you still need a special occasion, for heaven's sake, make one up. The Golden Classics.
Campbell's soup is good food.
Your Nissan dealers are kicking the competition right where it counts. The bottom line. Compare the bottom line price of our 5-speed Sentra with a comparable Toyota Tercel or a Honda Civic. Compare the Stanza with Toyota and Honda. Or compare our luxurious Maxima to the Toyota Cressida. All at rock bottom prices. And now special factory incentives can save you hundreds more. But don't wait and don't pay more. See one of these greater Iowa Nissan dealers today.
With us now live in our Washington bureau is ABC News political director Hal Bruno. And Hal, let's go back a week or two. You were talking to Howard Baker, and back in those days, you weren't thinking about him as a candidate for chief of staff. He was a candidate for president of the United States.
Yeah, about that time he had made up his mind that comes March he was going to become a candidate. Otherwise it was going to be too late. He did, however, feel that the damage done by this whole Iran-Contra thing was much worse than the polls revealed. He felt it was a silly thing that had happened, that it never should have happened, but that the damage was really serious, not only to the president, but to the entire Republican Party. And he felt that in order to start repairing it, that one of the first things the president had to do was reach out to the Democratic leadership in Congress in order to get things going again.
But I mean, had Howard Baker decided that maybe 1988 wasn't the right time to run?
Not then, but this week, he knew what was going to be coming out in that Tower Commission report, and he knew how damaging it was going to be. And I think this week, he started to have some second thoughts as to whether 1988 was a good year to be a Republican presidential candidate. But I think what really did it was not Howard Baker at all. It was Paul Laxalt who turned it down, and Frank Fahrenkopf, the chairman of the Republican Party. When Laxalt decided that he was not going to accept the offer, he told Fahrenkopf. And Frank Fahrenkopf said, well, we have a responsibility to at least recommend somebody to the president. So they talked, and they had three criteria. One, that the person had to have the respect of the president. He had to have the respect of the Congress. And he had to have the respect of the news media in this town. Howard Baker met all those criteria. So when Paul Laxalt went back to the president to say that he wasn't going to take it, he recommended Howard Baker. And I'm told the president replied, gee, that's a good idea. I hadn't thought of that. Now, I believe that was Thursday. They contacted Senator Baker in Florida. He came back today, and about 1:30 this afternoon, the president talked to him, and that's when the decision was finalized.
Hal, we've got less than a minute left. A quick question about management style. Everyone says, you know, President Reagan is not a terrifically good manager. He kind of delegates. What about Howard Baker? I've heard he's not that terrific a manager either.
I would disagree with that. Howard Baker is a very effective manager in a political sense, and that's what counts. Howard Baker, when he was majority leader of the Senate, as David or Ed said, he knew how to build a consensus. He surrounded himself with outstanding people, and he did delegate very well, but he has an instinctive political sense. He also people ran a very effective office for him. He'd get hundreds of letters every week, and the turnaround time in Howard Baker's office was 3 days for a reply to get out. But he knows how to do it, and he'll do it very well.
All right, Hal Bruno, thank you very much indeed. That is our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been ABC News Nightline. If you wish a printed transcript of this or any Nightline broadcast, please send $3 to Nightline Transcripts, 2 John Street, New York, New York, 10038. Nightline is a presentation of ABC News.
Saturday.
Who is she?
A strange visitor from another planet.
And I don't scare easily.
Saving the Earth was always a man's job until now. Peter O'Toole, Faye Dunaway, and Helen Slater. Super Girl.
This is your TV station, 5TV.
Welcome to Solid Gold 87. Television's hottest hour of popular music. Starring Marilyn McCoo. And Solid Gold reporting stars Kenny Loggins, Chris Christopherson, Bob Geldof, Samantha Fox, Survivor, Carl Perkins, The Jets. A special appearance by